Will 2025 be a good year to buy a house? That's actually one of the first things that pops up when you type in "Will 2025 be" in Google. Everyone wants to know, will 2025 be the year that they can actually afford a house? So today, let's discuss it. We're going to talk about what the experts are saying about 2025, what I am seeing on the ground here as a mortgage lender and working tightly with real estate professionals. Could house prices come down in 2025? Do we see a housing recession on the horizon? And then finally, we're going to put our crystal ball in front of us and we're going to see, what do we think about 2026? What's on the horizon? So that's all coming up. Stay tuned. You may have been sitting out the last few years in the housing market because it has been pretty expensive to buy a house. And the question on a lot of people's minds is 2025 going to be the year that they can actually buy a home? Is it going to be a good time to purchase a home? Well, I'm going to start this video by saying you should only buy a home if you can actually afford it, okay? A lot of people stretch their budget. They think that they're going to be somebody that they're actually not. They're going to budget more than they actually do, and they're going to stretch themselves into a home that they truly cannot afford. You really need to compare what your rent is to what your home payment is and see if it's worth it to you. Now, of course, I'm in the mortgage industry. I've been in the real estate industry since 1999. I know firsthand that real estate is probably the number one way to build wealth for most Americans, and I'm highly, highly in favor of owning homes. That said, you need to take a step back and see if it's the right time for you. I suggest talking to an expert. I'm happy to talk to you myself, but that's my little PSA right there on the front. Okay, so what are the experts saying for 2025? Well, supposedly the Fed is not seeing inflation coming down until 2026. The Fed has a 2% target that they're aiming for, and they don't see us hitting 2% inflation until 2026. So what does that mean for rates? That means rates may slightly decrease in 2025, but not at the level that we really want to see in order to energize the housing market to what it was a few years ago. All right. The good news about what's happening now is that incomes have actually risen. So more people are able to actually afford the higher rates, higher home prices than they had been in the past. 2 years ago, April 2022, when rates jacked up from 3% to 7%, incomes had not risen yet. So it was incredibly cost prohibitive for most people. But incomes have risen now and people are more comfortable with the payments. So that is a bright spot. Now, we did get a little peek about what could happen in the real estate market in 2024 when rates briefly hit the 6% mark, and some places even under 6%. Buyers came out of the woodwork and mortgage applications went way up. So we know when rates come below 6%, people are going to start coming out of the woodwork. So that means home prices might come up because we still have a lack of supply, and that lack of supply is expected to last until 2030. So that means that home builders are not going to be able to produce as many homes as they need, as we need in the economy, until 2030. So we're going to still feel some constraints. So what does that mean if you own a home? That means you should expect some more appreciation on your home. And that's another reason to buy a home if you don't own one yet, if you can afford it, because your asset, your home, will probably appreciate until that supply is leveled out. And that's going to be another 5 years, they say. Interestingly enough, at the end of 2024, we actually saw an uptick in housing demand, even in spite of 7% interest rates and lack of supply. But what we did see at the end of 2024 were houses that were sitting on the market a little bit longer. I actually worked with some couples that put an offer on a home that had been on the market for like 160 days. And this house actually appraised for $25,000 more than they have it under contract. This is an incredible opportunity because they are walking into instant equity. And at this time in the market, because days on market are so much longer, they are able to negotiate much lower. So yes, they are going to get about a 7% interest rate right now, but they're walking into some equity. They can comfortably afford it. And they know in the future, if rates come down, they're going to be able to refinance. So like I said, the interest in 2024 actually went up at the end of 2024 in spite of high interest rates and because of days on market for inventory creating some opportunity, actually Fannie Mae, the home purchase sentiment index, rose again to its highest level since February 2022. And I say that that's because of the added opportunity of negotiating plus increases in income. And the National Association of Realtors saw that existing home sales elevated 4.8% in November, posting the strongest year-over-year increase since June of 2021. And that was when rates were 3% or in some cases less than that. Another big question on a lot of people's minds, are we going to see a housing market recession in 2025? Now, let's take a step back and say, what is a housing market recession? That is when inventory builds, home prices plummet, and buyer demand also plummets. Do I see that happening? No. As I said earlier, we still have a historic lack of supply. We really need builders to build more homes. I believe in the 2025 with the Trump administration coming in, I mean, Trump's a builder. He likes to see things happening in terms of construction and in the housing market. So I think he might ease some regulations to allow some builders to build faster. You have to remember, this is not all the fault of the government. During the last recession, it was such a devastating recession to many, many builders that they just sat on the sidelines and were too afraid to start building homes again until demand reached its peak. And now that demand has reached its peak, land values are so expensive that it makes building a first-time home or something that's actually reasonable in most markets, it's just not even possible for a builder to make a profit at that price. So something's got to give, and I'm going to be waiting on pins and needles to see what happens in the Trump administration to see how they can tackle this issue. What about home values? What's going to happen to home values in 2025? Are they going to go down? A lot of people have been sitting on the sidelines saying, surely there's going to be a recession. Actually, if you go on Twitter, X, there's a lot of kind of doomsday housing predictors, and they've been saying for the last couple years that housing prices are going to go down. But I gotta be honest, I just don't see it. The supply is still low. In my zip code, home prices last year went up 11%. Now, what I do think is going to happen is that home price appreciation is going to stall, and it might stall for a year or 2 years. And that just means that if your house is worth $500,000 in 2 years, it might just be worth $525,000 or just whatever inflation does to bring it up naturally. It's not going to be worth $600,000, $700,000 like we saw a couple years ago. New construction inventory is actually 30% of sales right now, and they are going as fast as they can build them. And I don't see that stopping anytime soon. And I said earlier, we're probably not going to get out of this hole until 2030. So I just don't see a way that home prices can come down. Now, that said, all real estate is local. So there are areas of the country that were overbuilt, and there are areas of the country that demand is cooling. And so every area is different. You really need to get granular with your zip code. What's going to happen then? As I said, a lot of people are still expecting 2025 to be kind of, as my son would say, mid, and it just might be tough for another year. That said, let's look into our crystal ball for 2026. If your question is, will rates be lower in 2026? The answer to that is probably yes. At that time, the Fed is seeing inflation come down, and at that point, they should be cooling off the Fed fund rate, and that's going to make the cost of borrowing much cheaper. Here's a big drawback to rates coming down in 2026 or even at the end of 2025. When that happens, buyers are going to come out of the woodwork, and you're going to have a harder time buying your first home than you would have with less demand. So if you're considering buying and you can afford it, talk to somebody today to see if it's a good time for you. Before taking out a mortgage, you need to ask your lender, what kind of refinance program do they offer? So I offer all of my clients a zero lender cost refinance for up to 3 years. This is something that's pretty common in my marketplace and probably could be in your marketplace too. So before you buy a home or get a mortgage, make sure your lender's offering you that, because that could save you several $1,000s and actually make you a little bit more comfortable having a higher payment for a little bit longer than you might want, just knowing that down the road, if and when rates come down, you'll be able to have the home get the home appreciation, and then lower the principal and interest. Finally, the national housing market predictions for 2025 to 2029 came out on US News and World Report, and I thought they were super interesting. They're talking about what's their forecast for the next 5 years. And the NAR, National Association of Realtors, expects existing home sales prices to increase in the next 5 years by 17.3%. That seems to be pretty consistent amongst most prognosticators. Like, for instance, Redfin also predicts 17.2% price increases. This is going to be pretty interesting to see what happens. What this means is that housing for the foreseeable future is still going to be a pretty safe bet. Everybody's got to live somewhere. So if you're interested in buying a home, now might be your time. What do you think? I would love to hear your comments about what are you seeing in your marketplace? Do you think 2025 is a good time to buy? Do you wish you had bought earlier? Were you waiting on the sidelines? If you were, I'd love to hear your story and get your comments. All right, guys, Happy New Year, and we'll see you next time.